In this video, we create an Azure DevOps pipeline using stages and Terraform. Hello everyone, I'm Travis and this is Threltos. This is another video in the series on Azure DevOps pipelines. In this video, we create a pipeline with multiple stages. Similar to the last video, we deploy a virtual network and bastion host in Azure, only this time with Terraform. Before we get started, please like, subscribe to this channel, click the bell icon for notifications, and share with a friend. Become a member for early and ad-free access to videos, and check out my courses on Azure AD Hybrid Identities and Azure Virtual Desktop at udemy.com. The link is below. Back to it. We'll get to the demo quickly, I promise. Before that, let's take a look at stages and why we want to use them. We can create multiple stages and add jobs under each stage. We covered jobs in the last video. We can add conditional logic to stages and jobs. This gives us the ability to create some complex pipeline deployment scenarios, making a stage dependent on the value of a variable or the success of a previous stage. All helpful for a variety of deployment scenarios. For example, we may have one stage that builds an app or infrastructure, then another that runs a test on that app or infrastructure, then one that deploys the code if that test is successful. The example coming up starts with an existing Azure DevOps project. If you're just getting started, check out my playlist on Azure DevOps. The code used in this example is available in GitHub. I'll leave a link below. Let's jump into Azure DevOps to get started. Here we are in the Azure DevOps repo. I assume you have the basic understanding of Terraform, so I'm not going to go into detail on the actual Terraform code. If you're getting started with Terraform, check out my playlist on getting started with Terraform. The link will be on the screen or below or something. I tested the code locally to verify the Terraform deployment. It sets up a virtual network and Azure Bastion host, just like the last video, only with Terraform. I'll have a link to the files below if you want to try it yourself. The .gitignore file prevents the .terraform directory, tfstate, tfvars, and other files from getting replicated to the repo. This prevents local variables and settings from getting replicated to the DevOps repo. Generally, they don't need to be there. I did create a new terraform.tfvars file in the repo. YAML files don't handle complex variables, such as Terraform maps easily. It's cleaner to create a .tfvars file in the remote repo. Also, I have a storage account that will be used for the remote backend data. We use a centralized backend to prevent conflicts if others run code against the same infrastructure. Let's take a look at the storage account. We have a storage account with a blob storage container called tfstate, and that blob container is empty. Let's go back to the Azure DevOps project. Let's add a service connection next. The service connection gives Azure DevOps access into the Azure subscription to deploy resources. It will also be used to access the storage account for the backend configuration. Let's go into the project settings, service connections, create a service connection. We'll select Azure Resource Manager, and if we scroll down, we can go to Next. We'll leave it as Service Principal Automatic. Next. Log in with an account that has rights to add security principals into the subscription. Verify you have the correct subscription added. Leave resource group blank. We need to scope this at the subscription. We can give it a connection name. I'll call this one Dev Test Service Connection and click Save. That finished. Now we have a service connection for our project. Let's go back to the repo and create the pipeline. Here we are in Azure DevOps. Let's go to Setup Build. Select Starter Pipeline. Here we are in the pipeline, and before we get any further, I just want to show something. If you go to Show Assistant and type in Terraform, nothing shows up. If you get results, you're okay, but if you don't, we need to add the Terraform extension. We do that by going back to the organization, not the project. Go to Organizational Settings, Extensions. We're going to browse the marketplace and search for Terraform. Let's add the Terraform extension, the one published by Microsoft. Make sure your organization is selected and click Install. We can close this. Now if we go back into extensions, we can see we have the Terraform extension. Let's go back into the project. Here we are back in the Azure DevOps repo. Let's go back to Setup Build. Select Starter Pipeline. Now we're back in that same project, and if we go to Show Assistant, search for Terraform, there they are. That adds the Terraform extension to our organization so we can use it for our Terraform tasks. Let's get started with a pipeline by changing the trigger to none. That prevents the pipeline from running every time we make a commit. Next, delete steps and everything underneath it. We need to add some variables. These are for the backend storage account. Start with the word variables. We'll go to the next line and add our variables. We have a variable for the storage account resource group name, the storage account name, the backend container, and the backend storage key. Don't confuse the backend storage key with the storage account access key. The backend storage account key is the name of the configuration that will be added to the blob storage account. This one is named devpipeline.terraform.tfstate. We can change the key name if we're using this in a different branch. Next up, we'll add 2 stages. The first stage will verify the config. The second one will deploy the code if the verification passes. Start by adding stages. We'll go to the last line, add a line, and add stages. We'll add our first stage. After the hyphen, type stage. Give it a name. We'll call this one TF Validate. Next, we'll add jobs. This may be unnecessary. We only have one job, but it shows how jobs are nested in stages and tasks in jobs. We'll add jobs and then create our first job. So after the hyphen, we'll type job, colon, and we'll call this validate. Go to the next line, and under the J, we'll type continue on error. We'll set that to false. With this configuration, the job will quit if it fails. Next, add steps. Backspace to remove the dash. Let's open the assistant if it's not already open and add a Terraform install task. We'll search for Terraform. The image running the pipeline doesn't have Terraform installed on it. We have to add the install task to install Terraform before we can run any other tasks. Select the Terraform installer tool. I'm going to use the latest version for this example. You may want to use a specific version for production workloads, so breaking changes with a version update won't impact existing pipelines. We'll add that. Under task, let's add a display name. We'll call this TF install. Let's go to the next line and move the cursor under the dash. Remember, formatting is important in YAML. We'll add the init command next. We need to do this before we can run any other commands. Go to tasks and search for Terraform again. Add a Terraform task, not the installer task this time. Make sure the provider is set to Azure RM and the command is init, and go down to Azure subscription. Select the service connection set up previously. The next 3 items are for the backend storage. We can add the information directly in each field, but to make the pipeline more manageable and portable, let's use variables instead. Let's add the variable for the backend storage resource group. Next, add the variable for the storage account. Next is the blob container. And finally, the backend storage key. And make sure your cursor is in the correct spot. Clicking Add will insert the task wherever the cursor is located. Click Add. Add a display name, Init for this example. That adds the Terraform Init command. Go to the next line for the next task. We'll move the cursor under the dash. We'll add the verification task next. This will verify our code is good before it's deployed. Search and add a Terraform task. Leave the provider at Azure RM and change the command to validate. We don't have to add any backend storage configuration because that's part of the init command. Click Add. And update the display name with validate. Okay, looking good. Next, we'll add the deploy stage. Let's go to the last line and 2 spaces from the left for our next stage. There we go. Add dash stage. And we'll call it TF deploy. We want to create a condition next, so this stage only runs if the previous one completes successfully. Under stage, add condition. The condition is succeeded. And we'll specify TF validate. This indicates this stage will only run if TF validate is successful. Next, we also need the stage to run after the first. To make sure they don't run in parallel, we can add a depends on statement after the condition statement. And we'll add TF validate for this as well. Now this stage will be conditional on the first stage completing successfully. It also won't run until after the first one runs. Let's add a job next. We'll go to Jobs and add a job. We'll call this one Apply. Again, we only have one job in this stage, but it does demonstrate how to create multiple jobs in a stage. Let's add our steps next. The S in steps will line up under the J in job. Okay, we need to add the Terraform installer job and the Terraform init command next. We have to run these two as part of every job that runs the Terraform command. We could enter them like we did in the previous step, or we could copy and paste them. I like that idea better. We do need to be careful with formatting, so keep that in mind. Let's copy the TF install and init task and paste it under steps. Just the TF install and init task. We don't need validate. Watch for formatting. The cursor should be under the E in steps when we paste it in. Now we have the install and init command. Let's add the plan command. Go to the next line and move the cursor under the other dashes to add a new task. We'll search for Terraform again. Change the command to plan. Set the subscription to the service connector we added previously. And click Add. Update the display name to Plan. Let's go to the next line and move the cursor to add another task. We'll search for Terraform. Change the command to Apply. And set the subscription to our service connection. And add. Let's update the display name. We'll call this Apply. You may notice with inputs we've got some squiggly lines. It's telling us it's missing some properties, but as you maybe noticed, some of these properties are for AWS and others are for GCP, so we're fine. That does it. Let's save and run the pipeline. So we'll start by saving. Once it's saved, let's click Run the Pipeline. Make sure we're set to the dev branch. And it looks like I've got an error on line 11, column 1, unexpected value variables. So let's go and see what I mistyped. We'll edit that. And it looks like I added 2 colons. So let's remove one of those and try it again. We'll save this. And run. Make sure the dev branch is selected. And also, before we run it, if we go to stages to run, we have the option to select one or all of the stages. We'll leave them all selected and go back. Click run. Here we can see the 2 stages, the TF validate and the TF deploy. If we click on one of them, we can see the jobs running. That's a good validation passed, and now it's running apply. TF install finished, init finished, and plan is running. And now apply is running. It will take a few minutes to deploy the virtual network and Bastion host. I'll pause here and come back once it's done. That finished, and we've got no red X's, so we should be okay. Let's take a look at the portal and see the changes. Here we are in the resource group it created. And in that resource group, we have a VNet and Bastion host, just like we'd expect. Let's look at the storage account next. Here's the storage account. We'll go to containers, go to TF state, and there's our devpipeline.terraform.tf state file in the backend or remote storage location. So that was successful, but how do we get rid of resources? Let's go back to the repo. Let's create another pipeline that will destroy the resources we just created. Before we create the second pipeline, let's go into our pipeline. Go to the options of our existing pipeline and rename. And we'll change the name to Apply Pipeline. Save. This makes it easier to distinguish the apply and the destroy pipeline we're going to create. We don't want to mix those up. Now let's go back to repos. Make sure you're in the correct branch for this. We're going to copy a file. We can't copy a file directly, so we have to open the Azure-Pipelines YAML file and highlight and copy the contents. We're going to use this as the basis for our destroy pipeline. So if you highlight Control-A for all and Control-C for copy, and if you're on a Mac, you know what those commands translate to. Next, we'll create a new file. We'll call this Azure-Pipelines-Destroy. .yml. Great. And let's paste in the contents of the other YAML file. We need to make a few changes to this file. First, we don't need the TF validate stage. We already validated the code at this point. We'll leave the stages in, but we need to remove the first stage. So everything under stages to the second hyphen stage. I'll just scroll down a bit. So stages colon is in place, but everything underneath that, all the way to the hyphen stage TF deploy is selected. And I'll delete. We can also delete the blank line. Now we have stages, but only one stage. Next, change the stage name to TF destroy instead of deploy. We also don't need the condition and the depends on statement, since we got rid of what we've based that condition and depends on statement on. That leaves us with jobs. Change the job name to destroy. We still need the install task and the init task. And we can leave the plan task in. Let's go all the way down to the last task, apply. Change the display name to destroy. And something to note, we're not editing the file in the pipeline editor, so autofill won't work, but we're almost done. Under command in the destroy task, change the command to destroy. So we're not applying it anymore, we're destroying. So we've updated the names. And that all looks good. Let's commit. Now we have the YAML file, but not the pipeline yet. Go to Pipelines. New Pipeline. Select Azure Repos. We'll select our repo. And instead of Starter Pipeline, use existing Azure Pipeline YAML file. Set the branch to dev. That's where we created the file. And under Path, select the Destroy YAML file. And continue. Now we have the destroy pipeline. Click Save under Run. Don't run it yet, though. We could run it from here, but let's go to Pipeline. And we don't see it here under Recent. Let's go to All. There it is. Now let's change the name to Destroy Pipeline. And save. Now they're distinguishable between the two. Let's run the Destroy Pipeline next. Make sure that we have the correct branch selected. And run. We can view the jobs. The job's running. This will take a few minutes to finish. I'll pause here and come back once it's done. The deployment finished successfully, and the resources have been removed. That is how to create a Terraform pipeline in Azure DevOps with stages to validate, apply, and destroy resources in Azure. I hope this helps you better understand how to create stages in Azure DevOps pipelines and use Terraform with Azure DevOps. Thanks for watching.